Welcome to the 700 Club. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is urging Hamas to accept Israel's ceasefire offer if they truly care about the people in Gaza. Well, clearly they don't care because so far, no reply from the terrorist group.
Well, here in the U.S., police are breaking up anti-Israel demonstrations on college campuses across the nation. And Congress is now taking action as well. CBN's Julie Stahl brings us the story.
Though there are indications Hamas will reject the deal, there's no official response. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the terror group's answer will reveal whether it truly cares about civilians in Gaza.
Hamas has to decide whether it will take this deal and actually advance the situation for the people that it purports to care about in Gaza.
Blinken continues to oppose an invasion of Rafah, but Israel believes it's necessary to destroy the last Hamas battalions and free the hostages.
We're determined to take any action in order to return our hostages back to their home.
Meanwhile, diplomatic fallout for Israel, with the nation of Colombia cutting ties with the Jewish state. Israel's ambassador to the UN said the international body is a dream come true for every Palestinian terrorist, and he blamed it for setting off a wave of global anti-Semitism, including on American college campuses. Authorities have been cracking down on anti-Israel protests, arresting about 1,000 demonstrators nationwide. This morning on the UCLA campus, protesters and police clashed when officers moved in to dismantle the encampment. At the University of Texas, police say almost half of those arrested aren't even students.
What they did find when they arrested some of these outside agitators was guns, mallets, and other weapons that were confiscated by law enforcement.
The U.S. passed a bill that aligns federal education law with protecting Jewish students.
This bill will clarify that the Hamas hatred infecting our campuses must be dealt with as anti-Semitic discrimination that violates civil rights.
Some of the most virulent anti-Semitism has been on New York City campuses. The mayor says it's part of a worldwide plot to radicalize students.
This is a global problem that young people are being influenced by those who are professionals at radicalizing our children.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration is considering measures to help Palestinians already in the U.S. get their relatives in Gaza out and into America. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, welcome to the age of professional protests and professional agitators. It's been around for some time, but to see this kind of coordinated effort is truly amazing. It's like it's been sleeping on our college campuses, and all it took was October 7th to light it on fire. October 7th needs to be remembered for all time as one of the worst things, and hopefully it is the worst thing that will ever happen to the state of Israel. But in that, it spread this anti-Semitism across the world, and it's so unusual to see it on our own campuses. When you look behind it and start saying, well, how did all of this happen? How did suddenly there appear on college campuses all the identical posters, identical T-shirts? You look at some of these tent cities they're all the same tent. How did that happen? How did it happen so rapidly? Well, the rapid spread of protests on college campuses across the country is raising questions. Who's behind it all? Well, we've got a story from John Jessup. He has more on that from our CBN News Bureau. John?
Thanks, Gordon. The protests broke out on dozens of college campuses in a matter of weeks. Some observers say they appear too organized and well-funded to be spontaneous. CBN's Chris Mitchell examines who might be playing a role behind the scenes.
Being a Jewish student at the University of Michigan right now, it's definitely a scary and uncomfortable time. There's a lot of anti-Semitism on our campus, and it's extremely unsettling.
Jack Landstein describes what it's becoming like to be a Jewish student at the University of Michigan.
Intifada, intifada. So it's a lot of chants from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, intifada, intifada. bullhorns going through the school of business, going through the undergraduate library, making it very challenging for students to do work and focus. I sometimes am wary about wearing my Star of David outside of my shirt.
Landstein is not alone.
What they're doing is they're very clearly signaling to Jewish students that they're not welcome on campus, that they're not being protected by the university leaders in a way that they would protect any other group on campus.
Dr. Jay Green, educational policy expert at the Heritage Foundation, tells CBN News he sees clues pointing to a more professional, organized effort behind these protests.
We only get little hints of it, and the hints are that the funders include the Soros Open Society Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and there are also some links to foreign organizations as well. We've seen that people linked to foreign organizations have been involved in trainings, and that there are shared talking points and documents as well. So it's pretty clear that this is an externally funded and organized effort.
Green also finds familiar strategies recurring across the various campuses.
Among the common signs are that they're determined to set up camps so that it's more difficult to remove them, that they never have to leave them. That's one sign. A second sign is that they're setting up in the middle of public spaces within the university so that it is difficult for people to get to and from work, to and from classes without having to go through these protests. So they're effectively shutting down the normal operations of these universities.
Greens also observed a strong Middle East connection.
We've seen people from the Middle East come and provide trainings to them. And the biggest connection that we might identify between the Middle East and these protests is the very large number of Middle East students who are involved in them.
While polls show most Americans don't support the demonstrations, protesters are getting positive reinforcement elsewhere. Iran's foreign ministry condemns reports of protesters being arrested, although the Islamic regime has traditionally arrested, imprisoned, and even killed student protesters within its borders.
The Islamic Republic of Iran's foreign ministry in no way accepts violent and militarized response to students and their demands in Americans' universities. It rejects this approach and deems it concerning. It's necessary that the international community takes notice of this issue.
On social media, Hamas has praised the protest while warning the Biden administration. As this movement is expected to continue, Green expects protests will likely disrupt commencement ceremonies and believes many protesters will expand beyond college campuses to gather in Chicago at the August Democratic National Convention. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Turning now to the issue of abortion, the Arizona Senate voted to repeal a near-total abortion ban Wednesday. The state's high court weeks ago upheld the 1864 law, which has no exceptions except to protect the mother's life. The repeal already passed the House, and the governor is expected to sign it. Meanwhile, in Florida yesterday, Vice President Kamala Harris campaigned for abortion rights as the state's 6-week abortion ban took effect. That law has limited exceptions for the life of the mother or baby, as well as rape, incest, and human trafficking victims, but only through 15 weeks of pregnancy. Florida voters will decide the future of abortions in the state with a ballot initiative this November. Well, a major shift in one of the country's largest denominations, the United Methodist Church has lifted a ban on gay clergy members. At their annual conference yesterday, denomination leaders approved the move, one that progressive congregations have long been pushing. Not all UMC churches agree on the LGBTQ inclusion, causing a split in the denomination. In the last 5 years, about a quarter of churches have left the UMC. Well, new transgender rules from the Biden administration are at the heart of several state lawsuits. The changes would allow biological males to use girls' locker rooms and force some insurance companies to pay for transgender procedures. CBN's Lori Johnson has a story.
The major development causing this uproar came when the administration redefined sex in Title IX to include gender identity or an individual's sense of their gender. Congress established Title IX in 1972, providing females the same opportunities as their male counterparts in sports and other school activities up through college. Now, critics charge these changes will harm the very people the historic legislation intended to protect.
This is a fundamental upending of what we've known for equality within the concept of federally funded education for the past 52 years.
The new rules, scheduled to take effect August 1st, would allow males identifying as female entry into female bathrooms, locker rooms, and more.
Even on overnight school trips. For example, we've got a situation in Colorado where a school district there was telling a young girl that she would have to share a bed with a male on a school trip.
While the Biden administration intends to rule later on athletics, experts expect more of the same.
And we know when those policies go into effect, the harm that has on female athletes.
Alliance Defending Freedom is suing the Biden administration on behalf of the Rapides Parish, Louisiana school district.
And we anticipate filing more lawsuits in other parts of the country on behalf of student athletes and others that are harmed by this unlawful redefinition of sex by the Biden administration.
Similar lawsuits have already been filed in Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Montana, South Carolina, and Idaho. The Biden administration also addressed transgenderism within healthcare, specifically federally funded insurance programs like the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. The provision outlawing discrimination based on sex now includes gender identity.
If they want sex changes, if they want, these procedures, puberty blockers for kids, all sorts of things.
It could also possibly conflict with conscience objections.
So where doctors who don't think, for religious reasons, perhaps, that this is a good idea, or even for medical reasons that, maybe it's a bad idea to transition kids, they could be at risk too.
It remains to be seen whether the courts or possibly Congress step in to block the new rules. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
All right. Thank you, Lori. Gordon, back over to you.
This is such a disturbing trend, and you trace it back, and it's actually on the doorstep of the Supreme Court. Here's the case they decided. An employee of a funeral home decided that he wanted to start a transition. So here he is, a very tall male with a full beard, and he starts showing up to work in a dress. So as families are grieving, as they're conducting funeral services, there he is in the midst of them in his full beard and a dress. And so the funeral home said, we can't have this. This is hurting our business, and so we're letting you go. And the Supreme Court surprisingly ruled in his favor and said, well, Congress, way back in the early 70s, put sex in as a protected thing. And so if you're in a transition, you're now in some kind of protected class. Well, when you start expanding that into Title IX, and what is that going to do to high schools? What's that going to do to junior high schools? What's that going to do to colleges? Well, it turns everything upside down. And it's absolutely crazy to have this kind of policy. We're going to show you in just a minute that there may be foreign sources for that. We've already seen agitators on our college campuses. Is there foreign money going into this whole transgender movement, and is it trying to divide us and divide us on some very core issues that all of us say, no, you can't do this kind of thing. If this takes hold of Title IX, it's absolutely, it upends the whole idea of having women's sports be protected. And if you allow men to compete in women's sports, it's completely unfair. So this is something as a country we've got to come to grips with and say, no, not our watch, you don't get to do this. And especially if you're a foreign government, you don't get to influence our core beliefs and our freedom of conscience.